contact with the Beach Boys at all these days?
Not at all. No, I don't like Mike Love at all. No.
Why is that, Brian?
Because I don't like his attitude is too egotistical.
Just because you're bandmates and cousins doesn't mean you have to get along. The Beach Boys saw conflicts, creative differences, and tragedy throughout the band's career. The most prominent example of the band's conflicting nature was between Brian Wilson and Mike Love. Their feud is so deep and entrenched that reconciliation seems almost impossible. Did that basic family bond remain intact though? There's something at the end of the video that suggests it might have. But first, let's break down this feud and let me ask you a question. Whose side are you on? Brian Wilson's or Mike Love's? Pretty much since the band's formation in 1961, tension was a running theme for the group. The original lineup consisted of brothers Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson, their cousin Mike, and local friend, Al Jardine. In these early days, the tension was between Brian, Dennis, Carl, and their father Murray. Murray's influence on the young Beach Boys was significant. A songwriter himself, Murray took on the roles of manager, co-producer, and publisher during the band's early days. Now, we don't know the extent of Murray's mistreatment for all three brothers, but we can be sure that he was verbally, emotionally, and physically violent towards them.
Every couple of months you get mad about something, you go, get in the bathroom, get in the bathroom. I go, wham, wham! And he used to beat me in the ass, you know, it really, really, really hurt my feelings.
Did you live in fear of your father?
Yeah.
From there, tension would continue to play a big role in the dynamic of the Beach Boys. Al Jardine, the only non-family member, left shortly after their debut single due to artistic differences and doubts about the band's future. He was replaced by David Marks in 1962, who played on their first 4 albums. However, by August 1963, Marks had left due to conflicts with Murray Wilson and financial issues. Jardine, who had rejoined the band to cover for Brian, took back his original role when Marks departed. Even as the Beach Boys gained fame, Murray Wilson still tried to impose his strict control over the group. He prohibited alcohol, swearing, and socializing with women, imposing fines of $100 for those who broke the rules, and this later increased to $1,000. After their 1964 tour of Australia, the band had had enough. According to Mike Love's 2016 memoir, Brian and I drove to his parents' house and Brian told him straight out, "We can't deal with you anymore. We've got to get a new manager." And this would probably be the last time that Love and Wilson would agree on something. Despite this, Murray attempted to interfere with a recording session in mid-1964, but Brian Wilson, who usually struggled to stand up to his father, resisted this time. Brian physically pushed his father, forcing him to leave the studio. As the band's main songwriter, Brian Wilson also produced their albums, a remarkable achievement for someone so young. Alongside his work with the Beach Boys, he also produced for others like the Honeys. By winter 1964, the pressure to keep producing hits took a toll on Brian, leading to a nervous breakdown. He retired from touring but continued as the band's principal songwriter and producer. During this period, Glenn Campbell briefly replaced him on tour, later followed by Bruce Johnston, while Brian stayed home to create major hits for the band. It was around this time that Wilson would develop a drug problem.
I started generally with what I considered a recluse period where I was confined in my bedroom. I was taking drugs, I was snorting cocaine, which I don't agree with. I mean, I don't get behind anyone snorting cocaine. It's a very bad drug, but I did, and I did it. I had a lot of money, of course I'm a millionaire, and I was able to get a hold of all these drugs, you know, and they I was able to get a hold of all these drugs and they messed me up. They messed my mind up.
Brian also soon transitioned to LSD. While LSD inspired some of his greatest works, it also led to intense paranoia and further strained his relationship with the band, exacerbated by his absence from touring. Now, the feud between Brian and Mike starts around here, during the recording sessions for Pet Sounds. The band evolved from bubblegum pop icons to pioneers of psychedelic avant-garde with their 1966 album, which marked a profound shift in their musical direction. While not their only noteworthy album, Pet Sounds solidified their place in rock history as their most influential and groundbreaking work. Pet Sounds was often regarded, even by Brian himself at times, as a Brian Wilson solo project in everything but the name on the record. The rest of the band, apart from Mike Love, who had some direct communication with Brian, were largely unaware of the album's development. Its sound was a significant departure from the surf rock of their earlier work, and much of the album was recorded before the band members even entered the studio.
You know, my cousin Brian really had the time, since he wasn't traveling, to devote to his production techniques and developing his skills in the studio. So while we kept on touring, we'd come back and we'd hear a great track on Salute John B, or Wouldn't It Be Nice, or God Only Knows, and we would sing on it, and we'd do the vocals, you know. But he was he reached his high point in production there, and for a while, until about a year after that, or 2 years after that, he overdid it with some LSD and so on. So he that set him back mentally and emotionally for quite a while.
Mike Love and Al Jardine initially thought that the album was too arty for the Beach Boys, and there were reportedly concerns, particularly from Mike Love, about the lyrics and their abstract nature. However, Dennis and Carl have insisted over the years that all the members appreciated Brian Wilson's work. Mike Love has since expressed a desire for more of his lead vocals to be featured on the album, while Brian Wilson explained that he wanted the album to be recognised as more of a Brian Wilson project than a Beach Boys one. There were concerns within the band that Brian might use the album as a platform for a solo career, a worry fueled by the fact that the closing track, Caroline No, was released as a solo single by Brian. In the end, Brian remained with the band, for a time at least. Driven by his rivalry with the Beatles, especially Paul McCartney, and his own acclaim as a genius, Brian Wilson aimed to surpass Pet Sounds. He produced the groundbreaking track Good Vibrations, with Mike Love contributing the lyrics and deep vocals. Inspired by the psychedelic movement, Mike later expressed concerns about how fans would react to such an avant-garde track, noting that the song's universal themes helped it connect with listeners and reach #1. Brian acknowledged the significant input of his bandmates in creating Good Vibrations, emphasizing their shared goal of making music that would endure beyond surf and car songs. Despite the success of Good Vibrations, it marked the pinnacle of their achievements. Brian then focused on the follow-up to Pet Sounds, the infamous Smile album, collaborating with lyricist Van Dyke Parks. However, Brian's perfectionism and continued drug use led to delays, and eventually the album was shelved. There were also claims that Mike Love was particularly critical of Smile. It was ultimately left unfinished until its eventual release in 2004. Instead, they released the less ambitious Smiley Smile, with production credits given to the Beach Boys as a group rather than Brian individually. As Brian's creative control waned, the group's success began to decline. The impact of Love's criticisms on Wilson's decision to shelve Smile has been debated. Love himself has said a lot of that stuff is skewed by the crazies, but he did admit to calling some of the lyrics in Smile acid alliteration. From here, Mike Love gradually took charge of the band. For the 1967 album Wild Honey, production credits were attributed to the entire band, with Brian and Mike co-writing much of the material. The following year's Friends saw a further fragmentation, with contributions from Dennis Wilson and poet Stephen Kalinich. By the time of the 1969 album, 2020, Brian had checked into a psychiatric hospital, leaving the rest of the band to finish the record. Among the album's mix of outtakes and leftovers was a track, Never Learn Not to Love, officially credited to Dennis Wilson, but originally based on Cease to Exist, a song written by cult leader Charles Manson. During this period, Dennis Wilson was worryingly associated with Charles Manson. Al Jardine recalled the frustration of Manson's constant presence and influence, noting that Dennis wanted to include Manson's mantra-like melody in various songs. When the Beach Boys altered the lyrics of Manson's song, Manson threatened Dennis, leading to the end of their association. And in 1972, Bruce Johnston left the band. He initially joined the Beach Boys in 1965 as a touring musician, but became a key member, contributing to albums like 2020, Sunflower, and Surf's Up. In 1972, however, he was dismissed. Mike Love described this split as amicable, with Bruce Johnston wanting to focus on his solo work. Bruce himself cited dissatisfaction with Brian's slow departure from the group and concern about being part of an oldies act. Though the Beach Boys records continued to chart in the UK, In the US, their success continued to decline, until the release of the Endless Summer compilation in 1974. This collection of their greatest hits reminded fans of their earlier brilliance and revitalized their popularity, leading to major gigs, though Brian was still absent. In late 1975, Brian Wilson began treatment with controversial psychiatrist Eugene Landy. Despite the eventual disastrous outcome of this treatment, Brian managed to regain some stability, earning sole production credit on the commercially successful but critically panned 15 Big Ones, and even rejoining the band on tour in the summer of 1976. With members like Dennis Wilson working on solo projects such as his acclaimed 1977 album Pacific Ocean Blue, Brian felt well enough to attempt a solo career, and plans were made for an album titled Brian Loves You. However, the usual internal rivalries and jealousies disrupted this too. Despite Brian writing most of the album and playing most of the instruments on the album, the lead vocals were shared amongst the band members. This resulted in the release of The Beach Boys' Love You in 1977. Although Brian has always defended the album, and it's been reassessed positively in recent years, at the time it was a flop. Consequently, The Beach Boys' Love You became the last Beach Boys album predominantly shaped by Brian Wilson. Disheartened by the experience, Brian stepped back from the band, letting the rest of the members take charge of the production and writing. With Brian Wilson largely out of the spotlight, the Beach Boys focused on recording and touring, though they faced ongoing struggles with alcohol, drugs, and personal issues. The band's internal conflicts deepened when Stephen Love, Mike's brother and the group's manager, was briefly fired, but reinstated with the support of Mike and Al, despite Carl and Dennis's objections. Brian, avoiding confrontation, avoided the whole situation. This division led to separate touring factions within the band. The Beach Boys were essentially split into two touring camps. By 1983, tensions between Mike Love and Dennis Wilson reached a peak, resulting in mutual restraining orders. During this period, Brian worked with the band under Landy's strict control and remained socially isolated. Despite these struggles, the Beach Boys achieved unexpected hits in the late 80s with Wipeout and Kokomo. The recording of Kokomo became another point of contention between Brian, Mike, and Eugene Landy.
We tried to get him to record with us on that song, but he was under the tutelage, if you will, or under the spell, as some people would say, of Dr. Landy, the psychologist who governed his every move, and Landy would let Brian record with us only if Landy could be the co-writer or the co-producer of the record and stuff. And we had Terry Melcher was the producer. Now Terry Melcher had produced the Byrds and Paul Revere and the Raiders. He was very successful at what he did, and so he didn't need Gene Landy's help. So Gene kept him away. What happened though, we did a video in Florida of Kokomo, and Brian was in the video, but he wasn't on the record.
In 1992, Brian's memoir, Wouldn't It Be Nice, My Own Story, led to numerous lawsuits from Mike Love, Carl Wilson, and their mother Audrey. Mike Love settled for $1.5 million for defamation, and later in 1994, secured $13 million in lost royalties, also gaining co-writing credits on 35 Beach Boys songs, including the hit I Get Around. Love later accused Wilson of committing almost certainly the largest case of fraud in music history regarding song credits. A significant dispute also arose over the band's name. After several complex court rulings in the 1990s, Mike Love eventually gained full control of the band's name. A judge ruling eventually freed Brian from Landy's control after Landy had convinced Brian to redraft his will, leaving 70% of his estate to him. In the years following Carl Wilson's death, the Beach Boys were plagued with constant legal battles. After freeing himself from Eugene Landy's influence, Brian Wilson made a significant comeback, although not fully recovered. He began touring solo, and in 2004 released Brian Wilson Presents Smile, a reinterpretation of the original Smile project. And Mike Love, still touring as the Beach Boys, unsuccessfully sued Wilson over some re-recordings of old Beach Boys songs. The release of Brian Wilson Presents Smile led to the acclaimed Smile Sessions in 2011, and a genuine Beach Boys reunion in 2012. Brian Wilson, Mike Love, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, and David Marks performed together and released the fresh-sounding album That's Why God Made the Radio. However, this reunion was short-lived. Love and Johnston continued as the Beach Boys, while Wilson, Jardine and Marks performed under Brian Wilson's name. The band briefly reunited again in July 2018 for a Q&A session at Capitol Records Tower in Los Angeles. Following this, Mike Love said he wanted to make music again with Brian Wilson. However, this optimism didn't last. By February 2020, Love's Beach Boys were performing at a Safari Club International Convention, an organisation criticised for promoting trophy hunting. Brian Wilson condemned the appearance, highlighting their opposition to trophy hunting, and sharing a Change.org petition against it, which garnered nearly 80,000 signatures. Mike Love defended the performance, emphasizing freedom of thought and expression. The ideological rift deepened in October 2020 when Love's Beach Boys headlined a fundraiser for Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Wilson and Al Jardine were not aware of this event and issued statements distancing themselves from it. From there, it seemed like this feud would carry on forever, until this year, 2024. A judge approved a conservatorship for Brian Wilson due to a neurocognitive disorder, such as dementia, that affects his self-care, after Wilson's wife of 28 years, Melinda, died in January. So perhaps Brian's health convinced the two to bury the hatchet. Something else also happened this year which could have helped it along. In May 2024, a documentary about the Beach Boys was released on Disney+. In it, the members reunite and reminisce at Paradise Cove, the site of their original album cover.
Brian was remembering things from our high school days that I had forgotten.
Really?
He reminded me of. And then we sang a little bit of a cappella, Their Hearts Were Full of Spring.
Oh.
We sang some Fun. We sang some Barbara Ann. That was, and it was just very sweet. That was a true, it showed the true love between us.
And perhaps this reminiscing helped Brian and Mike mend things. Bruce Johnston said he felt like the documentary was a new beginning. He added, "I think once Brian and Mike sit round the piano and just the magic, you can't stop it." Mike Love went on to say they hadn't had a chance to collaborate yet, but it's a brand new day now and I'm hoping we can do something together. All of us, and it'll be great. Well, it all sounds pretty promising in 2024, doesn't it? Could we see performances with Mike and Brian together again? Hey, if the Rolling Stones can do it, the Beach Boys can too. We just have to hope that Brian's health doesn't decline in the meantime. Now, I mentioned the whole Charles Manson thing earlier, a really weird period for the Beach Boys. I've made an entire video about this. If you fancy watching it, click over here and watch it next.